Surviving this prison is harder than the crime. The first thing you lose when you enter this prison is not your freedom. It's your sense of time. Inside these walls, days don't pass. They blur. Morning feels like night. Silence feels louder than screaming. And every step you take echoes with a single question that never leaves your mind. How long can a human endure this before breaking? This place was built to punish the body, but it perfected the art of destroying the mind. For many who arrive here, the crime is already behind them. The sentence has been handed down. Justice, at least on paper, has been served. But what no courtroom explains, what no judge ever describes, is that surviving this prison often becomes harder than the crime that brought them here in the first place. The gates slam shut with a finality that feels unreal. Steel on steel, a sound that doesn't just lock you in, but locks the outside world away from you forever. From that moment on, life is reduced to rules, numbers, and survival instincts. You are no longer a name. You are an ID. You are no longer a person. You are a problem to be managed. Cells designed for one now hold two, sometimes three. Concrete beds. Thin mattresses that never fully block the cold. Lights that stay on longer than they should, if they ever go off at all. Privacy becomes a forgotten concept, like freedom or mercy. Every movement is controlled. When to eat, when to sleep, when to speak, when to stand. Even when to think feels regulated, because thinking too much in here can be dangerous. Danger doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes quietly. It comes in isolation so deep that men begin talking to walls just to hear a voice. It comes in routine so repetitive that the mind starts erasing days to protect itself. It comes in the constant awareness that one wrong look, one misunderstood word, one bad moment, can turn deadly. This prison doesn't just confine people. It tests them. How much humiliation can a person swallow before something snaps? How much loneliness can the human brain tolerate before it starts inventing company? How much fear can someone live with when there is no escape, no pause, no reset button? Guards rotate shifts and go home. Inmates stay. They learn the sounds of suffering the way others learn music. The distant shout down a tier. The metallic clank of doors opening for count. The sudden silence that means something has gone terribly wrong. For many, the real sentence begins after the cell door closes. Mental health deteriorates fast in a place like this. Anxiety becomes constant. Sleep becomes fragmented. Depression settles in like a permanent resident. Some inmates begin losing track of reality, not because they are weak, but because prolonged stress rewires the brain. And yet, the expectation is simple: endure. No therapy that truly heals. No space to grieve. No real path to recovery. Just survival. Men enter this prison angry. They leave it hollow. The ones who last the longest aren't always the strongest. They're the ones who learn how to disappear while still breathing. How to numb emotions without losing their grip on sanity. How to become invisible enough to avoid attention, but present enough to stay alive. This is a place where hope is dangerous. Hope makes time slow down. Hope makes you count days. Hope makes disappointment sharper when nothing changes. So many stop hoping altogether. And then there are the rules. Endless rules. Some written, some unwritten. Break the wrong one, and punishment comes swiftly. Sometimes officially, sometimes unofficially. Solitary confinement waits for those who step out of line. A cell within a cell. No human contact. No sound except your own breathing and thoughts. Days stretch into weeks. Weeks into months. Studies show that extended isolation can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and irreversible psychological damage. Yet here, it's routine. This is where the phrase hard time takes on a new meaning. Because the punishment isn't just time served. It's time endured under conditions that chip away at everything that makes someone human. Letters from family become lifelines. Missed visits feel like funerals. News from the outside world feels unreal, like it belongs to someone else's life. Birthdays pass. Parents age. Children grow up without faces being remembered. And still, the walls don't care. This prison was never designed for rehabilitation. It was designed for control, for containment, for making examples. Survival here requires adaptation that would break most people on the outside. Trust is rationed. Emotions are guarded. Weakness is hidden. Respect becomes currency. Some inmates find religion. Others find routine. Some cling to anger because it's the only emotion that still gives them energy. Others go numb, drifting through days like shadows. But no one leaves unchanged. Even those who eventually walk free carry the prison with them. Nightmares, hypervigilance, fear of closed spaces, the constant need to watch their back. Freedom feels unfamiliar after years of confinement designed to erase individuality. And for those who never leave, the prison becomes their entire universe. This is not just a story about crime. It's not just about punishment. It's about what happens when survival becomes the only goal. Because in this prison, doing the time isn't the hardest part. Staying human is. And as we go deeper inside these walls, you'll see why for many inmates, surviving this prison is harder than the crime that brought them here. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. Every prison sentence officially begins in a courtroom, but the real punishment does not start there. It starts on the day the transport bus pulls up to the facility and the gates open for the first time. For most inmates, this moment is burned into memory with terrifying clarity. The bus slows down. Chains rattle with every movement. Windows are narrow, scratched, sometimes painted over, but just wide enough to let reality sink in. Razor wire stretches across the horizon like a warning written in steel. Guard towers stand silent, watching, unmoving, already reminding everyone inside that escape is not part of the equation. No one talks much during this final stretch. Conversations die off naturally, replaced by shallow breathing and racing thoughts. Even hardened inmates, men who've been in and out of jails their entire lives, feel it. Because prison is not jail. And this prison is something else entirely. As the bus comes to a stop, the doors hiss open. Orders are shouted, sharp and emotionless. Step down. Line up. Eyes forward. Hands visible. This is the moment individuality begins to disappear. Names are replaced by numbers. Personal belongings are dumped into plastic bins. Wedding rings, letters, photos, watches, anything that ties a person to the outside world is cataloged, boxed, and taken away. What remains is the body, the charge sheet, and the sentence length. For many inmates, this is the first psychological fracture. You can prepare for years, but nothing fully prepares you for watching your entire life reduced to a receipt. Processing is slow and deliberately impersonal. Fingerprints, photographs, medical checks, strip searches that strip away more than clothing. The message is clear and intentional. You no longer control your body, your time, or your dignity. And then comes the uniform. The moment the prison clothes are handed over, something shifts internally. It's not just fabric. It's identity erasure. The color alone tells everyone who you are and where you belong in the system. From that point on, the prison decides how you are seen before you ever speak. The walk to housing is often quiet, but heavy. Long corridors echo with distant sounds, metal doors slamming, keys jangling, muffled shouts. Every noise feels amplified. Every shadow feels watched. Veteran inmates know better than to stare. New arrivals don't yet. They look around, trying to absorb everything at once, not realizing that even curiosity can be interpreted as weakness or disrespect. The first cell door closing is a sound that never leaves you. It's louder than expected, deeper, final. When it slams shut, it doesn't just lock the door. It locks in fear. Cells are smaller than people imagine. Concrete walls. A steel toilet in the open. A sink that spits lukewarm water. A thin mattress that barely cushions the metal frame beneath it. Some cells are shared. Others aren't. Both come with their own forms of psychological pressure. If you have a cellmate, you are immediately forced into an unspoken negotiation. Territory. Silence. Respect. Survival. If you don't, the silence can be suffocating. Lights on constantly. Even at night, true darkness is rare. Sleep becomes fractured within the first week. Bodies adjust slowly, minds even slower. And then there is the realization that truly breaks people. No one is coming to get you. Days are structured down to the minute. Count. Chow. Yard. Lockdown. Count again. The routine is designed not for comfort, but for control. Repetition keeps people manageable. Predictability reduces resistance. But predictability also wears the mind down. By the end of the first week, most inmates begin to feel time distort. Hours crawl. Days blur. Weeks feel endless. The outside world already feels distant, like a past life belonging to someone else. Fear settles in quietly. Fear of violence. Fear of being tested. Fear of making the wrong move without realizing it. Prison culture operates on rules that are never fully explained. You learn them by watching, listening, and sometimes paying the price. Who you talk to matters. Where you sit matters. How you walk matters. Even eye contact can be interpreted as a challenge. The guards are always present, but rarely protective. Their job is order, not safety. Inmates quickly learn that survival often depends on reading people better than reading rulebooks. Some inmates harden immediately. They project aggression, dominance, toughness. Others withdraw, shrinking into themselves, hoping invisibility will protect them. Both strategies come with risks. By the end of the first month, the mental transformation becomes visible. People speak less about home. Laughter fades. Faces tighten. Emotions flatten. Letters from family arrive like emotional landmines. They bring comfort and pain in equal measure. Photos remind inmates of what they're missing. News of birthdays, illnesses, or children growing up can feel unbearable. Many inmates stop writing back, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to explain a reality that feels unreal even to themselves. This prison doesn't need to torture inmates physically to break them. The environment does it naturally. Constant surveillance, constant noise, constant tension, constant uncertainty. Hope becomes dangerous here. Hope makes inmates count days. Hope makes them imagine release. Hope makes disappointment inevitable. So some learn to shut it down early. They stop thinking about tomorrow. They stop imagining freedom. They live only in the present moment because anything beyond the next count feels too far away to survive mentally. This is when the prison truly takes hold. By the end of chapter 1, one truth becomes clear. The crime may have ended years ago, but the punishment has only just begun. And from here on, survival will demand sacrifices no sentence ever mentions. By the time the second month inside the prison begins, most inmates have already learned a painful truth. Survival here has very little to do with strength and everything to do with psychology. The body adjusts faster than the mind ever will. Cuts heal. Bruises fade. Hunger becomes routine. Cold concrete stops shocking the skin. But the mental pressure never lets up. It presses down slowly, constantly, until even the smallest things begin to feel overwhelming. This is the stage where the prison stops feeling temporary. In the beginning, many inmates tell themselves they are just doing time. They mark calendars. They count weeks. They replay court dates and sentencing hearings in their heads, searching for mistakes, for moments where things could have gone differently. But inside this prison, reflection quickly becomes dangerous. There is too much time to think and not enough space to escape your thoughts. The mind turns inward, and for many inmates, that's where the real punishment begins. Anxiety becomes a constant companion, not the kind that spikes and fades, but a low-level tension that never shuts off. Every sound feels important. Every movement around you feels loaded with potential meaning. A laugh down the tier could signal nothing or everything. Sleep becomes unreliable. At night, the mind replays the day over and over. Conversations, looks, small interactions that suddenly feel monumental. Did that comment come across the wrong way? Did that silence offend someone? Did you miss a warning sign? When sleep does come, it's shallow, fragmented, filled with dreams that blend the outside world with the inside one. Some inmates wake up disoriented, unsure where they are for a few terrifying seconds, before the reality of the cell crashes back in. Morning doesn't bring relief. It brings routine. Count. Chow. Movement. Lockdown. The repetition is intentional. Routine keeps people compliant. It creates predictability in an unpredictable environment. But it also erodes the sense of self. Days become interchangeable. Weeks disappear. Time stops feeling real. This is where many inmates begin to lose their emotional range. Joy feels inappropriate. Sadness feels exhausting. Anger feels risky. So emotions flatten. Men who once laughed easily now speak in short, guarded sentences. Smiles become rare. Eye contact becomes brief. Vulnerability becomes something to hide at all costs. Because in here, vulnerability can be exploited. The prison environment forces everyone into constant social calculation. Who can you trust? Who should you avoid? Who is watching even when it doesn't feel like it? Trust is a dangerous currency. Some inmates give it too freely at first and pay for it quickly. Others refuse to give it at all, isolating themselves completely. Both extremes come with consequences. Isolation protects you from people, but not from your own mind. The longer someone goes without meaningful human connection, the more distorted their thinking becomes. Conversations feel awkward. Emotions feel foreign. Empathy dulls. Paranoia creeps in. Small slights begin to feel intentional. Neutral actions start to feel threatening. The prison doesn't need to turn people against each other. The environment does that naturally. And then there is fear. Fear isn't always loud here. It doesn't always announce itself with violence or confrontation. Often, it's quiet. It sits in the background of every decision. Fear of being targeted. Fear of being tested. Fear of being perceived as weak. Fear of standing out too much. Fear of disappearing entirely. Many inmates live in a constant state of hypervigilance. Their senses are always on, always scanning, always listening. Over time, this level of alertness becomes exhausting. The brain was never meant to operate like this indefinitely. Mental health begins to decline. Depression sets in quietly. It doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like indifference. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like giving up on personal hygiene, routines, or communication. Anxiety and depression feed each other in a closed loop. The more anxious someone becomes, the harder it is to rest. The less they rest, the more unstable their emotions become. And in this prison, help is limited. Mental health services exist on paper, but access is slow, inconsistent, and often inadequate. Appointments take weeks or months. Medications change without explanation. Therapy sessions, when they happen, are brief and clinical. There is no space to unpack trauma here. Many inmates carry unresolved trauma long before they ever entered the system. Abuse, addiction, violence, loss. Prison doesn't heal these wounds. It aggravates them. And yet, the expectation remains the same: adapt or break. Some inmates turn inward, retreating completely. They stop engaging, stop talking, stop caring. This emotional shutdown becomes a survival mechanism. If you don't feel, you can't be hurt. But numbness comes at a cost. Others go the opposite direction. They adopt aggression as armor. They posture. They intimidate. They stay loud and visible to avoid being perceived as weak. Anger becomes their shield. But anger is exhausting too. Maintaining a tough exterior 24 hours a day leaves no room for rest. One slip, one moment of vulnerability, can undo months of careful reputation building. The prison forces people to perform versions of themselves that may not be real, but feel necessary. Over time, that performance becomes identity. The man you were on the outside starts to feel distant, irrelevant, unreal. Inside these walls, survival requires becoming someone else. Someone harder, someone quieter, someone less emotional, someone more guarded. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, invisibly, one adjustment at a time. One compromise at a time. And then there is hope. Hope is complicated here. Too much hope can destroy you. It makes time unbearable. It magnifies disappointment. It turns every delay into a crisis. Too little hope, however, leads to despair. Some inmates strike a fragile balance. They hope quietly. They keep expectations low. They focus on small goals, making it through the week, the month, the year. Others abandon hope entirely. They stop thinking about release. Stop imagining a future. Stop planning. For them, survival becomes purely mechanical. Wake up. Follow rules. Avoid trouble. Go to sleep. Repeat. This is the psychological battlefield of prison. No headlines. No courtroom drama. No clear villains or heroes. Just men fighting silent wars inside their own minds. And as time goes on, one thing becomes undeniable. The prison doesn't just punish past behavior. It reshapes identity. By the end of Chapter 2, it's clear that surviving this place isn't about waiting out a sentence. It's about surviving what the prison slowly turns you into. Every prison has two systems operating at the same time. One is written down in manuals, policies, and handbooks. The other is never written anywhere, but enforced with absolute authority. The first system is run by the institution. The second is run by survival. By the time an inmate reaches this stage, they've already learned something critical. Following official rules will not keep you safe. It will only keep you from immediate punishment. Real safety depends on understanding the unwritten rules that govern daily life inside these walls. And these rules are learned the hard way. No orientation explains them. No sign warns you. No guard will tell you what you did wrong. The lesson usually comes after damage is already done. One of the first unwritten rules is simple but unforgiving. Mind your business. In prison, curiosity can be mistaken for surveillance. Looking too long, listening too closely, asking the wrong question, even being in the wrong place at the wrong time can turn suspicion toward you. People notice everything here. Who you talk to, who you avoid, where you sit, how often you move. Silence is often safer than explanation. New inmates often make the mistake of trying to be friendly with everyone. On the outside, that's normal. In here, it's dangerous. Being too social can make you look weak, desperate, or untrustworthy. Being too quiet can make you look suspicious. Finding the balance takes time, and mistakes are rarely forgiven. Another rule is about respect, though respect in prison doesn't look like politeness. Respect is about boundaries. Never touch another person's belongings. Never sit where you weren't invited. Never interrupt certain conversations. Never involve yourself in conflicts that aren't yours. Even accidental violations can be interpreted as deliberate. Apologies don't always fix things. In some cases, acknowledging the mistake only confirms guilt. Then there is the rule about debt. In prison, nothing is free. A snack, a favor, a phone call, a small act of kindness. Everything has a price, even if it isn't mentioned at the time. Debts create leverage. Leverage creates control. Many inmates get into trouble early by accepting help they can't repay. What starts as generosity can quietly become obligation. And obligation, in here, is dangerous. Another critical rule involves reputation. In prison, your reputation is built quickly and lasts a long time. If you're labeled weak, people will test you. If you're labeled aggressive, people will challenge you. If you're labeled unpredictable, people will avoid you. Sometimes, avoidance is the safest outcome. This is why many inmates choose their first confrontation carefully. Not to win, but to establish boundaries. Not to dominate, but to signal that they won't be easily exploited. Violence isn't constant here, but the threat of it always exists. Most conflicts are settled long before fists are thrown. A look, a word, a refusal, a moment of stillness. Those who don't understand this language are often the ones who get hurt. There are also rules about alliances. No one survives prison entirely alone. Even those who keep to themselves rely on some level of understanding with others. But alliances come with expectations. Loyalty, silence, participation. Choosing the wrong association can put a target on your back. Choosing no association at all can leave you isolated and vulnerable. It's a constant calculation. Who offers safety and who brings risk? Then there are the rules about guards. Contrary to popular belief, aligning too closely with staff can be just as dangerous as opposing them. Being perceived as cooperative is fine. Being perceived as a snitch is not. The line between the two is thin and often defined by perception rather than fact. Inmates learn to speak carefully, to report only what is absolutely necessary, to solve problems internally whenever possible, because involving staff can escalate situations beyond control. Another unwritten rule is about emotion. Showing fear invites pressure. Showing sadness invites exploitation. Showing anger invites consequences. So emotions are filtered, controlled, edited. Pain is swallowed. Frustration is hidden. Grief is delayed indefinitely. Many inmates don't cry until years later, sometimes after release, when it finally feels safe to do so. This emotional suppression is praised as strength, but it quietly causes damage. The most dangerous rule of all, however, is this. Never forget where you are. It sounds obvious, but it's the rule most often broken. Familiarity breeds mistakes. Comfort breeds carelessness. When inmates begin to feel settled, they let their guard down. They joke too freely, speak too honestly, forget that every interaction is layered with power dynamics. That's when things go wrong. Because prison doesn't reward comfort. It punishes it. The longer someone survives, the more rigid their behavior becomes. Not because they want it to, but because the environment demands it. Movements become measured. Words become deliberate. Trust becomes rare. Life narrows. Days are no longer about growth or purpose. They're about avoiding mistakes, avoiding attention, avoiding consequences. And slowly, the unwritten rules replace the outside world's values. Honesty becomes optional. Compassion becomes risky. Silence becomes wisdom. This is how the prison reshapes behavior without ever issuing an order. By the end of Chapter 3, one reality becomes unavoidable. Surviving prison isn't about serving time. It's about navigating a system where one invisible mistake can cost everything. And the longer you stay, the more these rules feel permanent. There comes a point in long-term confinement when survival stops being physical and becomes entirely psychological. For some inmates, that moment arrives quietly. For others, it arrives like a collapse. By the time Chapter 4 begins, the prison is no longer unfamiliar. The sounds are known. The routines are memorized. The faces blend together. What once felt overwhelming has become normalized. And that normalization is dangerous. Because this is the stage where the mind begins to fracture, not from shock, but from erosion. At first, inmates believe that getting used to prison is a victory. They celebrate small milestones. 1 month down, 6 months down, a year survived. The anxiety that once kept them awake all night dulls slightly. The constant fear eases just enough to feel manageable. But the prison is patient. It doesn't break people all at once. It wears them down slowly. Days become indistinguishable. Without meaningful change, the brain stops marking time properly. Memories blur. Weeks vanish. Some inmates struggle to remember what day it is, not because they're careless, but because the environment offers no meaningful markers. Monday feels like Thursday. January feels like June. Time loses texture. This is when dissociation begins. Inmates describe feeling like they're watching their lives from a distance. Like they're present physically, but absent mentally. Conversations feel hollow. Events feel unreal. Even emotions feel delayed, as if they belong to someone else. Dissociation is the mind's defense mechanism. When reality becomes unbearable, the brain creates distance. But that distance comes at a cost. People stop feeling fully alive. Simple decisions become exhausting. Motivation disappears. Getting out of bed feels pointless, even though there's nowhere else to go. Hygiene routines slip. Appetite changes. Sleep cycles break down further. And then there are the thoughts. Thoughts that loop endlessly. Thoughts that have no resolution. Thoughts that replay the past in cruel detail. Many inmates fixate on their crime, not out of remorse or denial, but obsession. They replay the moment again and again, imagining different outcomes, different choices, different versions of themselves. The mind tries to rewrite the past because it can't escape the present. Others fixate on imagined futures. They plan conversations that may never happen. They rehearse reunions that feel impossibly distant. They build detailed fantasies of freedom just to survive the day. But these fantasies can turn against them. When release dates get delayed, when appeals fail, when parole is denied, hope turns into despair, sharper than if there had been no hope at all. This is where depression takes its strongest hold. Not dramatic sadness, not constant tears, but a deep, numbing heaviness. Inmates stop reacting to news from home. Stop caring about conflicts around them. Stop defending themselves emotionally. They exist, but they no longer engage. Guards notice it. Other inmates notice it. The person themselves may not. They are still breathing, still walking, still following rules. But something essential has gone quiet. This is also the stage where paranoia can develop. Living under constant surveillance, surrounded by people who may pose a threat, the brain begins to overcorrect. Neutral actions feel intentional. Coincidences feel orchestrated. Whispers feel personal. Someone laughs nearby, and it feels like it's about you. Two people talk quietly, and it feels like a plot. A guard looks your way, and it feels like punishment is coming. Paranoia thrives in isolation and uncertainty, and prison provides both in abundance. For some inmates, this paranoia becomes debilitating. They stop leaving their cells, stop interacting, stop trusting even those they've known for years. Every interaction becomes a potential threat. Others externalize it. They become confrontational, defensive, quick to anger, always ready for conflict, even when none exists. Their aggression isn't about dominance. It's about fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being targeted. Fear of being erased. And then there is grief. Grief in prison is unlike grief anywhere else. There are no funerals, no embraces, no private moments to process loss. When a parent dies, the news comes through a letter or a brief conversation. When a child grows up, it happens through outdated photos. When relationships end, They often end silently, without closure. Inmates are expected to absorb these losses and return to routine immediately. Count still happens. Chow still happens. Lockdown still happens. Grief becomes something you carry quietly, because expressing it openly can be dangerous. Some inmates cry in the shower, where the sound of running water hides weakness. Others cry at night, silently, facing the wall. Many don't cry at all, because they can't access the emotion anymore. This emotional suppression compounds the damage. Psychologists call it cumulative trauma, the stacking of unresolved stressors over time until the nervous system becomes overwhelmed. But in prison, there is no language for this. There is only survival. Mental health crises increase during this phase. Self-harm becomes more common, not always as a suicide attempt, but as a way to feel something, anything, in a world that has gone numb. Others engage in reckless behavior, provoking conflicts or disciplinary actions, unconsciously seeking stimulation or release. Some inmates begin talking to themselves, at first quietly, then out loud, then regularly. It's not madness, it's loneliness. When human connection is limited, the brain creates it. Conversations with imaginary versions of loved ones. Arguments with people from the past. Narration of daily actions just to fill the silence. The prison environment doesn't correct this. It normalizes it. Guards see it every day. Other inmates understand it instinctively. This is what prolonged confinement does. And yet, life continues. New inmates arrive, still wide-eyed and fearful. Old inmates watch them with detached curiosity, recognizing themselves from years earlier. The cycle repeats endlessly. Some inmates try to fight the mental decline. They read obsessively. They exercise relentlessly. They cling to routines with military discipline. These strategies help, but they're not cures. They slow the damage, they don't reverse it. Others surrender completely. They stop planning, stop resisting, stop imagining anything beyond the walls. The prison becomes their entire world, not because they want it to, but because it's easier than holding on to something they can't reach. This is the quiet tragedy of long-term incarceration. Not the violence, not the headlines, not the crimes, but the slow disappearance of the person who entered. By the end of Chapter 4, it becomes painfully clear. Surviving prison is not about staying alive. It's about holding onto your mind in a place designed to dismantle it piece by piece. And the longer the sentence, the harder that battle becomes. Time behaves differently in prison, not because the clocks are broken, but because meaning is. On the outside, time is measured by milestones. Birthdays, holidays, achievements, progress. Even setbacks carry movement. Something happens, something changes, something follows. Inside this prison, time doesn't move forward. It accumulates. Days stack on top of each other like weight. Weeks press down. Years don't pass, they linger. The future exists only as a concept, not a certainty. And the longer someone remains inside, the heavier time becomes. This is the chapter where endurance is tested not by fear, not by violence, but by waiting. Waiting becomes the dominant experience of prison life. Waiting for count to clear. Waiting for chow. Waiting for mail. Waiting for visits. Waiting for appeals. Waiting for parole hearings. Waiting for something, anything, to change. Most of that waiting leads nowhere. And that is what damages people the most. In the early years, inmates still measure time optimistically. They count down. They mark calendars. They tell themselves, if I can just make it through this year, everything will feel different. But after enough time passes, a realization sets in. Nothing feels different. The routine remains. The walls remain. The restrictions remain. The absence remains. And slowly, time stops feeling like a path and starts feeling like a sentence all its own. Long-term inmates often describe a moment when they stop asking, how long do I have left? And start asking, what does time even mean anymore? Birthdays lose significance. Celebrating another year alive inside a cage feels hollow. Holidays become reminders of separation rather than comfort. Even personal milestones, like sentence reductions or program completions, feel muted because they don't change the present reality. This is when institutionalization begins to deepen. The prison schedule becomes the body's natural rhythm. Wake-up times feel automatic. Count times are anticipated instinctively. Meals are eaten quickly, even when there's no rush. Free time feels uncomfortable because it lacks structure. When structure disappears, anxiety fills the space. Some inmates find that silence makes them uneasy. They're so accustomed to constant noise that quiet feels threatening. Others struggle when routines are disrupted, even slightly. A delayed count, a lockdown extension, a schedule change. What would be minor inconveniences on the outside become emotionally destabilizing inside. Because when time is all you have, any interference with it feels personal. Relationships suffer deeply during this phase. At first, family members call regularly. Letters arrive consistently. Visits are emotional but hopeful. Everyone promises to stay connected. But time erodes those promises. Children grow older. Partners grow tired. Parents grow ill. Lives on the outside move forward, while the inmate remains frozen in place. Phone calls become shorter. Letters arrive less frequently. Visits are missed, then stopped altogether. Not always out of cruelty, but because maintaining a relationship with someone trapped in time is exhausting. Many inmates internalize this abandonment as personal failure. They blame themselves not only for their crime, but for becoming inconvenient to love. Shame settles in. Communication becomes strained. Eventually, some stop reaching out altogether. It hurts less to let go than to be slowly forgotten. This emotional withdrawal reinforces isolation, which deepens the psychological toll. Inmates begin living almost entirely inside their own heads. Memory becomes a refuge, but also a trap. They replay moments from the past in extreme detail. A childhood afternoon, a conversation before arrest, a normal day that felt insignificant at the time but now feels sacred. But memory is unreliable. Over time, it becomes idealized. The outside world transforms into something unreal, something polished by longing. Reality and imagination blur. This makes reintegration terrifying. Some inmates quietly fear release. Not because they want to stay in prison, but because they no longer know how to exist outside it. Technology changes. Social norms shift. Relationships evolve. The world moves on without them. Prison, for all its brutality, becomes familiar. Familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. This fear rarely gets spoken aloud, but it influences behavior. Some inmates sabotage opportunities without realizing it. Others violate rules close to parole dates. Not consciously, but because the unknown feels more threatening than the known. Time also affects identity. After enough years, people stop introducing themselves by who they were. They start identifying by their sentence length, their housing unit, their routine. I'm a lifer. I've got 20 in. I'm on my third decade. Time becomes a label, and labels shape self-perception. When someone is reduced to a number for long enough, they begin to think like one. Worth is measured by compliance. Success is measured by survival. Ambition shrinks to fit the cell. Dreams feel irresponsible. This is also the phase where many inmates confront the permanence of what they've lost. Careers that will never happen. Families that will never be rebuilt. Versions of themselves that will never return. This grief is quieter than earlier grief, but heavier. It's not about a single loss. It's about cumulative absence. What makes this phase especially cruel is that the prison rarely acknowledges it. There are no programs for existential exhaustion. No counseling for time-induced despair. No recognition that simply enduring year after year is a trauma in itself. Instead, inmates are expected to function as if nothing is wrong. Still line up. Still follow orders. Still adapt. Still survive. And many do. They find meaning in small routines. Making coffee just right. Exercising at the same time each day. Teaching another inmate to read. Sharing stories quietly during yard. These moments don't restore freedom, but they restore fragments of humanity. Others retreat completely. They sleep whenever possible. Avoid engagement. Let days pass without resistance. Time washes over them like water over stone, slowly smoothing away what remains. Neither path is easy. Both are responses to a system that demands endurance without offering relief. By the end of Chapter 5, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Prison doesn't just take years from people. It teaches them how to live without years meaning anything at all. And once time loses meaning, survival becomes a question not of strength, but of identity. When most people think about prison, they imagine a beginning and an end. A crime. A sentence. Time served. Release. But after everything we've seen, everything we've walked through together inside these walls, one truth stands above all others. For many who survive prison, the sentence never truly ends. Because prison doesn't stop at the gate. It follows people, long after the uniforms are returned, long after the cell door opens, long after the final count is called. The prison leaves its mark not on the body, but on the mind. For those still inside, life continues in a suspended state. Days repeat, years accumulate, time stretches endlessly forward without promise. Survival becomes routine, and routine becomes identity. The outside world slowly transforms into an idea rather than a destination. And for those who eventually walk free, freedom itself can feel unfamiliar. The first steps outside are often overwhelming. The air feels too open. The noise feels too loud. Choices feel paralyzing. After years of having every movement controlled, deciding something as simple as where to stand or when to eat can trigger anxiety. The world moves fast. Technology has changed. Social rules have shifted. Conversations feel rushed. People expect normalcy from someone who has lived in a world where normal no longer existed. Former inmates carry invisible habits with them. They scan rooms instinctively. They sit with their backs to walls. They wake up early without alarms. They measure trust cautiously. They avoid crowds. These behaviors once meant survival. On the outside, they become reminders of where the mind still lives. Nightmares are common. Dreams of doors slamming shut. Dreams of being late for count. Dreams of being locked in again. Some wake up reaching for walls that aren't there. Others avoid sleep entirely, because sleep brings the prison back. And then there is the stigma. A record follows people everywhere. Jobs, housing, relationships, even basic opportunities become conditional. Society demands that people pay their debt, yet often refuses to accept that the debt was ever paid. This contradiction weighs heavily. How do you rebuild when the past is permanently attached to your name? Many struggle in silence. They don't talk about what prison did to them because they believe no one wants to hear it. They feel pressure to be grateful for freedom while still carrying the damage of confinement. So they say they're fine. They learn to smile. They learn to deflect questions. They learn to keep the hardest parts locked away, just like they learned inside. For those still incarcerated, hope becomes a fragile thing. Some hold on to it fiercely. Others protect themselves by letting it go. Both approaches are acts of survival. Because in a place where time stretches endlessly, hope can either sustain you or destroy you. And yet, despite everything, humanity persists. Inside prison walls, people still form bonds. They still tell stories. They still laugh quietly at the yard. They still help each other survive moments that feel impossible alone. Even in a system built to contain, people find ways to remain human. That is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. Not that prison is harsh. Not that prison is violent. Not that prison breaks people. But that people continue to endure it. Every man and woman inside carries a story far more complex than their worst decision. Behind every sentence is a life shaped by circumstance, choice, trauma, and consequence. This documentary was never about excusing crime. It was about understanding punishment. About asking what survival really means when the environment itself is designed to strip identity, hope, and time. About questioning whether a system that demands endurance without healing can ever truly produce justice. Because when surviving prison becomes harder than the crime itself, something fundamental has gone wrong. If there is one thing to remember after everything you've seen, it's this. Prison does not just punish actions. It reshapes lives. It redefines time. It alters minds. And the effects ripple outward, touching families, communities, and generations. The walls may be tall. The gates may be locked. But the consequences extend far beyond them. This is the reality of survival behind bars. Not measured in days or years, but in what it costs to remain human. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.